Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webcast, Social Marketing, a tool for more effective stormwater education and outreach programs. This webcast is sponsored by EPA's Office of Wastewater Management. My name is Ansu John. I'm with Tetra Tech, and I will be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining us today. We'll get started here in a few minutes, and while we wait for others to join us, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. For the first time in this Stormwater webcast series, we'll be showing a few video clips. In order to view these video clips, you'll need to download the most recent version of Adobe Flash. If you haven't already downloaded the software, please do it now. And if during the webcast you're unable to view the video, don't worry. The speakers will go over the contents of the video clips in their comments. The materials in this webcast have been reviewed by EPA staff for technical accuracy. However, the views of the speakers and the speakers' organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the EPA. Mention of any commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean that EPA endorses them. We will have several question and answer sessions during the webcast. To ask a question, simply type your question in the text box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and then click on the Submit Question button. Now, you don't need to wait until the question and answer periods to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit your questions early. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but due to the high number of participants, all questions may not get answered. However, today's speaker's contact information is provided on your screen should you have questions following the webcast. To alert us to any technical difficulties you encounter, you can click on the Help button to obtain the phone number and email address to receive technical support from ON24. You may also use the Ask a Question area to post any technical issues you're experiencing, but please include a telephone number where you can be reached, and we will help you troubleshoot your problem. Now, there'll be several occasions when the speakers will ask you questions. The presenter will post questions in the slide window, and so please submit your answers in that same slide window, not in the Ask a Question box. At the end of the webcast, you will be asked to complete an evaluation survey. The survey will appear in a pop-up window, so please now turn off your pop-up blocker at this time. If you're using Internet Explorer, that would be under the Tools menu item. Another new feature in this webcast series is that you may now receive a certificate if you have viewed the live webcast. So in order to receive the certificate, you'll need to listen to at least 1 hour and 45 minutes of the webcast and answer some poll questions. And once you fulfill these requirements, you can click on the Download Certificate button to view and print your certificate. If you have technical difficulties with the certificate, click on the Help button to obtain the phone number and email address for technical support from ON24. And after today's webcast, email Nico Singelis for questions about the certificate. Finally, this webcast will be archived indefinitely, so you can access it after today's live presentation. The archived webcast will be posted within 2 weeks on the same website. I think we're ready to kick off the session. Today's speakers are Nancy Lee, Jack Wilbur, and Nico Singelis. Nancy Lee has more than 25 years of practical marketing experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She is president of Social Marketing Service Incorporated, an adjunct faculty member at the University of Washington, and a frequent speaker at conferences, seminars, and workshops for public sector managers and administrators. Together with Philip Kotler, she has co-authored 3 books: Social Marketing, Improving the Quality of Life, Corporate Social Responsibility, and Marketing in the Public Sector. Jack Wilbur is a public information specialist for the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food and coordinator of Utah's non-point source information and education programs, and has been for the past 15 years. In February 2007, Jack released a social marketing guidebook called Getting Your Feet Wet with Social Marketing, a social marketing guide for watershed programs. And Nico Singelis is a familiar senior program analyst with EPA's NPDES Stormwater program, has been for the last 7 years, and works on many projects aimed at helping Phase 2 communities implement this challenging program. We have an excellent presentation before us today, so without further ado, let's get started. I'll now turn the microphone over to Nikos. Good afternoon, Nikos.
Thank you, Ansu, and welcome, Nancy.
Hi.
Today we're going to be talking about social marketing, as you've all read the blurbs in the emails and on the website. And social marketing is a particular tool that we want to use. As you can see on the first screen there, we have the 6 minimum measures listed there. And social marketing is a very important tool that we can use in our public education efforts and also in our public involvement efforts. And the main idea is to try to get citizens involved in correcting the stormwater pollution problems that many of our watersheds are facing today. You'll recall last year that we did an introductory webcast on the topic of education and outreach, and we talked about EPA's Getting in Step manual at that point. And today we're going to take that general topic a little bit farther and talk about some very specific techniques that you can use to help bring the public along, change behaviors, and really get them to participate in solving the stormwater problems that we are looking at. So let's take a look at the next slide here. One thing that I want to keep people aware of, too, is that often people think in the stormwater program that education and outreach is kind of a separate thing and it's not connected to the other minimum measures. Well, in fact, it is both its own entity, and sometimes we do education and outreach for our own, for the general purposes of raising awareness about stormwater problems, and as we'll talk about today, to get people to change their individual behaviors. But it's also a key ingredient in the other minimum measures, so hence this slide here that shows it kind of in the center and connecting to all these other pieces of the program. A couple examples, for instance. In the post-construction program, Phase 2 MS4s are required to develop requirements and ordinances and design standards and all that for post-construction BMPs. But in order to really make that program effective, you've got to work with your development community, your builders, your developers, to get those things implemented in the right way. So there's an education component to that. Similarly, in illicit discharge, if you're going to set up some kind of a hotline and you want your citizens to call in when they see something going on, you've got to tell them what to look for. So there's an education element that's critical to the success of all these minimum measures, and the techniques that we're going to talk about today, I think, can be used in all parts of this program. So keep an open mind to that as we move along. Just to refresh your memory, the regulations, the Phase 2 regulations that EPA promulgated and became effective in 2003, very briefly discuss what's needed. And this minimum measure is, in fact, very simple and straightforward. But it starts out saying you must distribute educational materials to the community, and it's actually the second piece that really gets into what we're going to be talking about. Conduct equivalent outreach activities about the impacts of stormwater and the steps that the public can take to reduce pollutants in stormwater. It's that last little phrase that really is going to determine the success of our programs. So not much direction there, but a key idea embedded in this requirement here. So let's look at the next slide here. These are some of the recommendations in there, the kinds of you can, of course, beg, borrow, and steal materials, and we'll talk about how to do that. And we've got a new thing that we can announce to you today, too, that will help you do that. Of course, you'll want to inform the public about how they can get involved. We'll talk a lot about, and we also talked in the previous webcast, about how to target your message to particular audiences. With all parts of the stormwater program, you do really want to focus on the water quality problems that you have and try to connect that back to particular audiences or particular segments of your community. You want to get the most bang for your buck. So that concept of targeting is very important. And of course, you'll also want to keep in mind the special concerns that you would have with minority communities or disadvantaged communities who may not get information in the same way, that might have language barriers, et cetera, et cetera. So many things to think about there. And of course, there's a wide variety of people that you need to reach. And some examples. Of course, you're going to need to reach your managers and your elected officials, non-governmental organizations. There's a whole list here: students, potential volunteer groups, citizens, etc. So, and staff within the city government, Ansu points out. So again, there's a whole number of different people depending on what your target is at the moment that you're going to need to reach. And it's more, just to keep in mind, it's more than just citizens generally. So the thing that we're going to really be talking about today here is this critical point about what is outreach. And Nancy's going to talk a lot more about this. But you'll remember this slide perhaps from the previous webcast, or if you've read the Getting in Step manual. This is kind of the key to it. We have a message, a desire that we want. We want people to do something or adopt a new behavior. So we transmit that in a message to them. But it's not enough to just stop there. We've got to get that response back from them. And that response, in this case, what we're going to be talking about is changing their behaviors. The next slide shows much the same thing in a slightly different way of looking at it. This idea of raising awareness is part of this. People have to have a context to put it in, something to care about, something that appeals to them. So that's part of that awareness raising and education piece, but ultimately it's that action that we're looking for. And then this slide also covers the same sort of things. You're going to want to look at what your audience does, how they get their information, what they do on a day-to-day basis, and what things do you want to alter in kind of their daily routines that maybe they're not so aware of.
And these are the categories that you want to look at.
Right. Yeah, and there's the pictures here, show some of the typical categories that we'll be looking at. And just to remind you, this is from the Getting in Step method. This is the building blocks that we go through in trying to set up a good and effective public education program. So we start basically at the bottom by looking at and doing research about what our audience knows, what their goals are, what their desires are, how much what kind of behaviors they're engaged in. Then we want to break that down into certain target audiences that we focus on. What kind of, we use the word message here, but we're going to change that a little bit today and talk about the outcomes really that are desired. How are we going to get that message to them? What format will it take? The method of getting it out there. Where will we publish it? What media will we use? Where do people get most of their information? And particularly, where do they find that information credible is another important piece of this. And then finally, that follow-up loop, which is very important and often neglected, is the evaluation part, to measure the actual changes that you're gaining through your efforts, and to do that on a regular basis so that you can refine your entire process and maybe better target it if you're not finding that you're getting the kind of results that you want. So a couple of things. The first that I'm most excited to announce after a very, very long and arduous delay is EPA's non-point source outreach toolbox. This was just released the other day after much time, as I've indicated, and it's a collection of about 800 TV ads, radio spots, newspapers, posters, billboards from all around the country that you can look at for inspiration. It provides you with information if you want to borrow it, who to contact, what the terms are. There's all kinds of information. So this is on EPA's website, and there's the URL for it, and I encourage you to go look at it and browse through it and get inspired. And again, we'll be actually talking about a couple examples that relied on beg, borrowing, and stealing, and this is a great place to do that from. Also, EPA's menu at BMPs has a lot of information in it. There's 120 or so fact sheets, many of them on education and outreach, so we encourage you to look at that. And of course, I've mentioned the Getting in Step manual that we have, and there's the website for that one as well. And I should also mention that while we do have this division in terminology between non-point source and stormwater, we like to think of it all as one thing, and we do cooperate with our fellow managers in the non-point source branch, and we share materials all the time. So congratulations to Don Way, who pushed this non-point source toolbox through, and hopefully is listening today. So now we have a poll question, and if you've been in any of our webcasts, you know how these poll questions work. But if not, we're going to be asking you a couple questions as we go through, and this is an easy one. We just want to get a better sense of who's in the audience out there. We have about 700 folks registered for this webcast, but we often don't know how many people are in the room watching from one computer. So if you can select the radio button to the left of the answer, choose just me, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, 10 to 20, or more than 20. We got a message from someone that said that they had 300 people in a room. So, wow. But anyway, we expect with about 700 people registered that we'll end up with about 2,000 people listening in today. So just take a quick click on the button and then hit the Submit Answer button in the window below, and we'll see what kind of results we have here, and we'll show you those in just a second. Okay, so Nancy, here's start at we've got a lot of people, 67%, sitting by themselves in their cube somewhere, just like the rest of us, listening in, but we have a fair number of groups. So that's good. So we'll calculate those results and come up with a better total for the total number of people that are watching us. We have one more poll question right now, which I'll now show you. Same thing, just click on the radio button right next to the answer. Who do you represent? We like to get a better sense of who's out in the audience there. So you've got a couple choices there, and this kind of helps us. Obviously, these webcasts are targeted to municipal Phase 2 stormwater managers, but we often get lots of other people, and we'd like to know who all is out there. So we will take a look and see what the answers are for this. We'll give you just a couple more minutes to take a look at that. And by the way, as Ansu said, we are offering two things that are different in this webcast. First, we are going to have a couple of video clips towards the end to show you, and we hope that technically all works out just fine. And then by popular demand, lots of people wanted some kind of a certificate to say that they participated in this, and so we will have that available at the end too. And in order to get that certificate, as Ansu mentioned, we do need you to answer the poll questions and stay with us. So there's a little coercion for you. All right, so let's show the results of this poll question. So as expected, about 50% of the folks out there are from local governments, which is great. That's our target audience. We also have, this time, a very good representation from state and federal, probably mostly state, about 23%. 11-12% consultants, industry a few, and the other category. So that looks pretty good. All right, so now we're going to move into the main part of this. So I'm going to introduce Nancy, who we are very grateful to have with us. She has participated, I believe it was 2 years ago, in the Non-Point Stormwater Education Conference that we had in Chicago. And she has spoken at many other EPA events and worked with our program and the Non-Point Source program pretty frequently over the last couple of years. So Nancy, I have a question for you to get you started on this section.
Okay.
So social marketing. And this question actually comes from somebody, I assume, who's in the audience who emailed me an early question, wants to know, does this have anything to do with Karl Marx?
Oh, my gosh. Well, that's why I like to do this. And I do want to, I'm going to answer that in a second. First of all, I want to thank you for having me be here. And I just want to let everybody have a little picture of what's going on here. We're in a room, and there's 5 of us. And I've never done this like over the web before, so it's really odd not to be able to see all of you. And especially those of my friends back in Washington State, I want to say hi. And back to your question about Karl Marx. You know, that social marketing is actually misunderstood by a lot of people. I think from the profile of this audience, I would guess it's fairly familiar. But I still have people, especially like I belong to Rotary, and I'll have people in my Rotary Club who look at my classification of social marketing and they'll say, what is social marketing? And I say, well, what do you think it is? And I have gotten at least 10 times, well, do you run a dating service? So I really love the opportunity to clear that up and to say that no, social marketing is not the same as communism or socialism. And so we'll spend a couple of minutes defining what social marketing is, even though many of you may be familiar. I want to spend some time as well on why it's so hard. I have worked in banking and I've worked in the healthcare sector, and I can tell you that I think that social marketing is the hardest of all marketing jobs. And I want to talk about why it is so hard. And then I want to relieve it a little bit and talk about 12 ways to make it easier. In case you can't read that first slide, it remains one of my very favorite social marketing slides. It's on a little dock up in Desolation Sound, and it says, please do not drop your cigarette butts on the deck. The fish crawl out at night to smoke them, and we're trying to get them to quit. And what I love about that is that not only does it engage with a little bit of fun, but it makes you really kind of like the messenger. And we'll talk about how important the messenger is for people being willing to do what it is we want them to do. So on to the formal definition of social marketing. Before I tell you the formal definition, I'm going to do a little poll question here. Could you, almost like one of those tests where the first thing that comes to your mind, I want to get a sense from you. What's the first thing you think of when you hear the specific word marketing? So when you hear marketing, what do you think of? And I think there's going to be a poll question up here for you. Can they see a poll question?
I think we might have made a technical mistake on this, Nancy, so it may be a rhetorical poll question.
That's okay. So, Nikos, before you ever got truly educated about this, when you thought of marketing, what did you think of?
I thought of things like, advertisements on TV, buy Coca-Cola, what have you, those sorts of things. That's what I thought about marketing.
So advertising and sales.
Yeah. How about you, Ansu?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to say that I always think of manipulation.
That's why it's up there. These
Making me feel good about things like smoking cigarettes. I could, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
These are the things that usually people say. And the reason is because that's what we usually see. That's what we usually see and then label as marketing. And yet Peter Drucker said, if we do everything else right in the marketing process, if we design a great product, if we price it right, if we have it conveniently located, we won't even need to do much of those things right there. So I'm going to talk a lot about how all of those other tools in the marketing toolbox are important as well. So for the formal definition of social marketing is the use of marketing principles and techniques, the very same ones I used when I was a bank marketing director, to influence a target audience to voluntarily accept, reject, modify, or abandon a behavior for the benefit of individuals, groups, or society as a whole. And I want to pick it apart just a little bit. First of all, voluntarily is highlighted for a reason. We want to use social marketing when we want to try to get the public to do things without regulating them and enforcing it. So this is something we try before we try laws and fines and enforcement. The other thing is that sometimes we use social marketing to get people to start doing something. So accept is one kind of a behavior. So Nikos, what's something that you want people to start doing that they may not be doing now at all?
How about, for stormwater, how about something like putting less fertilizer on their lawns?
Okay, so right now they're putting some fertilizer and you want them to put less.
Or at least to maybe to analyze their soils first before they do it.
Very good. So how about accept the behavior of analyze your soil before you fertilize? Terrific. Not doing it at all. You want them to start doing that. Reject is a behavior that they're not doing it now, and you don't want them to start doing it. What would that be?
Let's see. Something they want to reject.
Or you want them to reject.
Well, let's see. How about sometimes we have the, oh gosh, nothing's coming to mind.
Pouring oil down the storm drain, like people know that's wrong. And
yeah, that's, I think that varies from place to place, right.
But if they've never done it before, you want them to never start doing it.
Yes, that's true.
And a modify is a behavior where they might be doing it some of the time, but not all the time.
Right.
So you want to do a modify behavior?
Sure. How about like grass clippings?
Yeah. What do you want them to do?
Well, I think, probably the best thing would be to mulch them.
Mulch them. Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes they mulch them and sometimes they let them go into the bag of the lawnmower, right?
Right.
So you want to modify that behavior.
Yeah.
And then abandon is something that they're doing that you don't want them to do at all anymore.
Right.
What would that be?
How about picking up dog poop?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want them, well that would,
I'm sorry, leaving dog poop on the street.
Leave the dog. Stop leaving it.
Yeah.
Okay, you get the idea.
Yeah.
So the point is that you may be trying to influence people to start doing something new, to never start doing something, to modify their behavior, to actually stop doing something. The three-word definition, the one that I really want you to remember, if you're in a Rotary Club and someone asks you what it is the three-word definition, influencing public behavior. All three are important here. You're looking at influencing, which is like persuading, a public, and it could be a business, it could be a landscape group, or it could be kids in a school, but it's some public, and you're influencing their behavior. So the thing about social marketing that distinguishes it from most other disciplines is that what we're trying to do here is to influence a behavior like eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day, leave oyster shells on the beach, mow high, let it lie, pick up after your pets, reroute your downspout to a rain garden, wash your car at a commercial car wash. If you look at each one of those bullets, what you're going to see is an action item. You're actually going to be able to see the behavior. And this is very different. Like eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day is very different than eat healthy. So in social marketing, we get down to the very specific behavior that we want. We want to be able to not only be able to measure whether that they did it and observe whether they did it, but we want them to be able to know what it is that we want them to do as well. And social marketing is typically used in 4 areas. It's used to improve health, to prevent injuries, to protect the environment, and to involve the community. It has been more used in the health area than in the environmental area, but now we're starting to use that term in the environmental area as well. It differs from commercial marketing, what I did at the bank, because there we were selling goods and services for a profit to benefit the shareholders. It's actually different than what I did at the hospital, where there we were promoting the services of the hospital and supporting the hospital's fundraising. Social marketing, as distinct from that, is changing behaviors. Now, corporations may do social marketing. You may see a corporation who's actually trying to influence public behaviors in the area of the environment or health, and you may see nonprofit organizations doing it as well, like the American Heart Association. But what they're doing is a social marketing campaign. And it also differs from education. I like to say that educators, and I am an educator, so I know this is true, that educators can typically go home and declare victory when people know something or have a skill that they didn't have before. Social marketers, on the other hand, we have to hang out. We have to stay around until the audience actually changes a behavior or actually does the behavior that we want them to do. It also gets collapsed with advertising and communications, when in fact that's only one of the tools in our toolbox. There are 3 other very powerful tools, product, price, and place, that I'll mention. And if you really think about it, think about Starbucks. We don't see, and I haven't seen, much advertising for Starbucks. And yet that's because they've got a great product in a convenient location. Therefore, they can price it and not do much promotion. So sometimes when you do the other part really well, a great product at a great location, then you can charge more and do less promotion. So I think we're going to, 1,000 times harder. As I said, I've done marketing in the corporate sector and in the nonprofit sector, and this is the hardest. And one time I was actually looking at what is it that people actually have to do in order to do this behavior. And when they do the behavior, what's the cost to them? Well, sometimes we ask people, and Nikos and Ansu, I want you to give me examples for this. See, in social marketing, sometimes we may be asking people to do something, and as a result of doing it, they're going to be uncomfortable. So what can you think of as an example? It might be good for your health, safety, or the environment, but you're going to be uncomfortable when you do it.
I'll go.
Huh?
See, I grew up in India where we know that the sun is really, harsh, and we have no problem holding umbrellas like in the midday sun just to shield ourselves from the sun. But in the summer here, when I walk around with an umbrella, everyone looks at me really weirdly, despite the frequent public health warnings about the damage that UV rays can do, especially in terms of skin cancer. So, yeah, I look foolish in the summer, but, I think I'm doing the good thing for my health. But sometimes I do put my umbrella away because I really don't want to look silly.
Very great.
So.
How about something that if you do it, you could get rejected, maybe even by somebody you really like or want to be with?
Oh, that's hard.
That's a tough one.
Well, an example I'll give you just for the sake of time would be when you try to take your keys from somebody you think has been drinking too much.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
All right. Reduce pleasure. Okay, it's good for the environment, but it's not going to be as pleasurable for you as it was before.
Saving water,
Yep.
like low-flow
Showers
and things
Very
like
good.
that. Yeah.
They do not feel as good on your shoulders. Something that if you do this, you're not going to look as good as you did before. You're going to give up. You're not going to look good.
Well, I think, Ansu, that's for you.
Well, so the other one is, people look at people who travel on airplanes with masks really like they're, are you trying to put yourself in a separate category or something?
Right.
But I think it's perfectly protective of their own health. And,
Very good.
But, yeah, I would have a problem doing that because I don't want to appear weird to others.
Compulsive.
Right, yeah.
How about something that if you did this, you'd be embarrassed? It would be good for your health, safety, the environment, but you'd be embarrassed.
Umbrella.
There's your umbrella again. We're in Seattle, we ask people to let their lawns grow brown in the summer. And if the neighbors aren't doing this, you could be embarrassed by how brown your lawn looks. Go out of your way. We're asking you to do this, then you're going to have to go out of your way to do this.
I like taking household hazardous waste somewhere. Very difficult.
Very good. You're going to have to spend more time if you do this.
Spend more time. Take public transportation to
Very
work.
good. Perfect. Or spend more money.
Use those eco-friendly products that are sometimes more expensive.
Right.
Even the recycled paper is more expensive sometimes.
That's right. So see, even though in social marketing they're not paying to do something, in monetary, we're asking them to do a lot of things that they have to then, that are in the psychological area, the time area, and the effort area. And next slide here.
By the way, I have to make a comment that I skillfully got Ansu to answer the more embarrassing questions, and I didn't have to reveal anything.
Didn't have to reveal a thing. So let's just find out now, are there any questions about the definition of social marketing, influencing public behavior, the applications, how it differs from education, and why it's hard? Any questions about that?
So, Ansu, do we have any questions out there? I see some.
Believe it, we have a flood of questions. Nancy, way to go. I think you're generating a lot of kerfuffle out there. We have several. Here's Sherry. Now, this is probably both for Nancy and Nikos together because there are people from local government here asking questions about the program as a whole as well. Now, Sherry Wilkins from West Virginia has implemented a stormwater management program in her community, of course, but she brings up the point of how do you make people get over that hurdle of thinking of the stormwater management program as a rain tax. They just received they just sent out in their utility bills some kind of additional amount of money for stormwater management, and that's perceived as a rain tax. You know, is there an easy to convey message about, you know, stormwater management program? And how do you get over that public hurdle, that public mental hurdle?
Oh, okay. Well, I can take a stab at that one, but I think I'll inspire you, Nancy, to add something to this. I think one of the things that you have to do when setting up a stormwater utility, which is such a critical thing, you know, to have a permanent source of funding for your stormwater program, is to make sure that you take the time to really emphasize the benefits that the community is going to realize from this, so that they don't perceive it as a rain tax. So a lot of the successful examples that I know of stormwater utilities, they really spent a lot of time really marketing what the benefits would be. So for instance, if there was flooding problems in a given community, they spent a lot of time talking about how this would mitigate those flood problems. When they set it up, the first thing that they really need to do is have a couple quick projects with big signs that say your money at work here, so people see the benefit.
Yeah.
Because if it gets twisted around a little bit to this rain tax idea, I think you're going to have a big hurdle to get over. So you have to almost head that off at the pass.
There's a phrase in a quote that says that everybody is listening to WIFM, which means what's in it for me.
Right.
And what we need to do is, first of all, find out what they want out of it, and then help them see the benefits for them personally. And personally may very well be their own pets and their own kids in their yard.
Right.
It may not be a fish out in Puget Sound.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. If you've got backyard flooding problems or basement flooding problems that affect a bunch of people, these are things that, yeah, you have to tie it back to something that they want daily. Now, if you've got a lot of fishermen in your community, they're going to see the stream perhaps as a benefit, or at least that segment of your population. But, you know, you've got to tie it to things that people, you know, really value.
Yeah, I would imagine in West Virginia that's a good way to connect it back to the community, the health of your fish when you go fishing.
Right. Can you eat the fish? Right, because that's, you know, people want to do those sorts of things. Okay, so do we have another question?
Yes, we do. Julie Che from California is asking about evaluation. So if our goal is pollution reduction, okay, out of the stormwater management program, how do you actually get to measuring the outcome of a public outreach program?
Okay.
And I'll just jump in, if you don't mind, Nancy, and mention that Nikos had mentioned the outreach toolbox, EPA's outreach toolbox. Well, the toolbox has an enormous section there on surveys of public outreach campaigns done across the country, how they've done audience testing, as well as evaluations of public outreach campaigns. So for existing examples, they could look in the outreach toolbox.
Great.
There.
I'll just add one thing to that, and that is that one of the beauties of social marketing is that there's always a behavior in the campaign. And so you would measure the behaviors that you are trying to influence, and you would measure changes in those behaviors. That would be your near-term, short-term outcomes. Your long-term outcome, which we actually call in social marketing the impact, would be the reduction in pollution. Much more difficult to connect to. And yet we'll make some assumptions when we are given, as marketers, some behaviors to influence. We're going to make some assumption that those behaviors will have an impact on the social issue, in this case, pollution reduction.
Sure.
But in social marketing, we focus on measuring the behavior change.
Well, in the interest of time, let's continue to take questions, but let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody out there that you can submit questions anytime. You don't have to wait for the breaks. All right, so let's move on.
Okay, so if the point is out there, I hope that it's hard. Let me talk about 12 ways to make it easier. And the very first one is to take advantage of what's been done before that works. This will save you time, money, and you'll be more successful. As Nikos just mentioned, there is a toolbox now, and I took a look at that. It's got hundreds of examples of things, not only that will inspire you, but ones that you can actually use. So I would give you, definitely go to that toolbox, and I think you've got the URL for that close by.
I have another resource for you, too, that you can steal from. On the NPDS website, we have a collection of materials that have been there for sometime now under the Stormwater month, and all those materials are in the public domain, and you're free to take those and modify them for your use. We have all kinds of posters and brochures and things like that there as well. Okay, let's go on to the next.
An example of that would be when I was at that conference that Nikos mentioned in Chicago a couple years ago. I saw this poster on the right, and this poster on the right, I believe, if I'm not wrong, came from Michigan. Is it Michigan? No, on the right. On the one on the right. I think it. Yeah, and it was fascinating to me because I'm in Washington State, and the one on the left was developed there in Washington State. And so when I saw the one on the right, I realized that's fantastic. They were inspired by that, but they made it their own with their own landscape in the background. So I thought this was a great example of use what's out there that's already been done before. You can do that in the public sector. The second principle we'll talk about is target marketing. So the principle here is to target the markets that are the most ready for action. And it's not necessarily intuitive that we do this, but I want to explain why. So first of all, if the term's not familiar to you, target market is simply very specifically who you want to persuade or influence. And I want to stress that that may very well be consumers or residents or homeowners downstream, but upstream it might very well be policymakers. It might be people in the media. It might be corporations. So whatever your target market is, it's who you want to specifically influence to do something. And in the environmental area, one of the categories that I like to talk about is a categorization called greens and sprouts and browns. And we could divide up all consumers, actually even other groups as well, into one of three categories: the greens, the sprouts, or the browns. And the best way for me to demonstrate it to you is to imagine that we've got this bottled water. And I'm gonna have it right here with me, and I'm gonna ask Nikos something. Now, I want you to imagine that I found out that Nikos, not only is he an expert in stormwater, but I found out that he had a previous life in recycling, and that he was an expert in recycling. And if I were a green, I would have when I found this out earlier, I would have cornered Nikos in this room, and I said, "Oh, Nikos, I'm so excited to meet you. I have been wanting to know something, and I've got to get the right answer to. Can I ask you a question? Like, I always recycle this bottle, but I don't know what to do with the cap. Like, because the cap feels like it's a lot heavier weight plastic. What do you want me to do with the cap, Nikos?"
Well, that's true, Nancy. I think the cap is a different kind of plastic oftentimes, and many places ask you to separate the cap. Some places will maybe even ask you to throw that out with your regular trash, but I would check with your local instructions to see what they say about that.
Okay. And how about that label? Do you want me to take the label off and put it into the mixed paper section? Because I'd be really glad to do that. Should I put it in mixed paper or?
Well,
yeah.
Dear Nancy, I would say if that makes you happy,
yeah.
please feel free, but it's really not necessary.
And there's this glue. There's this glue. It leaves this residue of glue underneath there. And I usually take a razor blade and scrape it off, but I didn't know if alcohol with a Q-tip would be just as fine. I don't want to screw up your machine, though.
Well, thank you so much for your concern.
That's a green.
Uh-huh.
A sprout. A sprout will have that bottled water, and when they're finished it'll look around the room or look outside in the hall, and they'll look for a place to recycle it. And if they don't find one, what they'll do, I put that little picture of that garbage can there, they'll put it beside it. They won't put it inside. They'll put it beside it because they don't really want it to go into the garbage, but they're also not going to take it home. The browns are people who are watching these greens and sprouts and thinking they need a life. Like, what in the world are they thinking? So the world and environment people that you will be targeting could be in one of those three categories. The very best target market for you, if you want more behaviors, want more sales, I'll say, are the sprouts. The sprouts are people who want to do the right thing. They just have some barrier. We're going to talk about barriers next, but they've got a barrier, and your job is to then get rid of the barrier. And by the way, if we get all the greens and the sprouts, they'll surround the browns. And then the browns will feel very uncomfortable. Just a quick example of this, in Seattle, at Seattle Public Utilities, they had 1,500 rain barrels that they wanted to to sell to citizens as a way to start getting people used to rainwater harvesting. And a survey showed that the most likely people to buy the rain barrel were not necessarily segmented best by age, income, occupation, but they were avid gardeners. Knowing that the people who were the most likely to get the rain barrel were gardeners gave direction for all of the materials that they used, everything from posters to where they had their displays to sponsorships to radio programs. It gave them all kinds of information as to where to go with their communication strategies. And by the way, by 9:15 on the day of the sale that started at 9 o'clock, the rain barrels were sold out. And what I'd love to talk about in terms of outcomes, if we had more time, is that that's being used to have a different way for people to actually be able to reserve ahead of time so that they can come and reserve a barrel or reserve a food waste compost so that they can know that there will be enough of them for everybody. Next principle that we're targeting here is our third principle.
Actually, next we
have a
This is Bob.
video.
Bob is a do-it-yourselfer. Bob changes his own oil. Bob used to pour his used motor oil down the storm drain. Bad Bob. Bad. Now, Bob takes his used oil to a free recycling center to keep from polluting our water. Bob is such a swell guy. Now, all the women love Bob, and Bob is living happily ever after. If it worked for Bob, it can work for you too. Dispose of your used motor oil properly. Oil and water really don't mix.
I apologize. I didn't know that played first. So that should give you a sense of somebody that's created a spot. And that is on the toolbox, by the way. Is that right? Yeah. That's a great example of a spot that actually understood the target market very well and then put them front and center into their spots. Pardon? City of Greensboro. Thank you. Principle 3. The principle here, and I want to say I don't see this done enough, and I would really love to encourage you to do more of this, and that is to promote single, simple, doable behaviors. Rather than saying 25 things to do to do natural yard gardening, focus on one at a time. Even if you want 25 things, focus on one at a time. One that will make a big difference, one your audience will understand, and one that you can observe and actually measure. For example, let's say you want people to fix leaky toilets. It might be a good idea for a while to simply promote, check your toilet to see if you've got a leak. And so a single, simple, doable behavior, one step at a time, almost like baby steps, are more likely to get us to do all of the behaviors that we want. Principle 4 is to understand your audience's barriers to behavior change. As I was talking about earlier, we needed to understand what was in the way of that person not being able to recycle that bottle. It turns out it wasn't that there wasn't something convenient, but we need to take the time here to understand our audience's barriers. Some of them are just imagined, and some of them are real, but from what I've seen in the past, most of the time, there's something that you can do to help remove that barrier. For a salmon-friendly gardening project in the Seattle area, there at the annual Flower and Garden Show, we handed out a little postcard, to have people actually tell us what was in the way or what did they think it would be difficult for planting native plants. And there were several options for questions that they had to find out, well, what is really the problem with people planting native plants? And what we found, for the most part, was that people didn't really know what plants were native and what spots they should go in. So that had implications to materials that were developed for the program that actually, like an Excel spreadsheet, displayed the types of plants and what their location would be best for them. So understanding the barriers, which to me is a real gift from your target audience, for you to really understand what's in the way, you take that and then that is your guide for developing your strategies. I'm sure that if we did not have these kinds of mutt mitts, as some people call them, in parks, we would not have the number of people picking them up that we do. So we handled one barrier simply by putting these plastic bags in parks. In Snohomish County, one of the barriers that they discovered, especially among homeowners or people in their homes where they were picking up after their pets in public places, but they weren't picking up after their pet at home. And when queried, the behavior turned out to be, one of the barriers turned out to be that, well, I get home after work and it's dark outside and I let my dog out and I don't see where they go. So what they developed to handle that barrier is a product. A product is a little flashlight that hangs right by my front door and says, scoop the poop. And so then that removed the barrier of wanting to pick up after the pet, even though you didn't have, it was dark outside. And so we have a poll question.
Yes, Nancy, we have another poll question. So we're going to ask you just to choose a couple of options here. What are the barriers to doing outreach in your stormwater program? And we have a couple options here. These may be what you sort of perceive. Is there a lack of knowledge about ready-to-use materials for you? Do you have budget constraints? Maybe a lack of staff time? Or I believe we have expertise in here too. Maybe your upper management is not really all that interested in it. You don't have evaluations to show your success, et cetera, et cetera. So choose the one that maybe is most impacting you right now, and we'll take a look at those results. So again, click the radio button, and we'll take a look and see what kind of results we have here. Maybe we'll just give you a few more seconds just to make sure that you've got a chance to answer that, and then we will push the latest results out to you right now. So let's take a look here, Nancy. 10%, 11% said they lack the knowledge about ready-to-use materials. Well, I think we've covered a lot of that with the toolbox discussion today. Of course, not too surprisingly, budget constraints are a big issue, and we've certainly heard that in many contexts before. Lack of staff time and perhaps I would imagine expertise as well maybe also fits into that, is the leading one. And then some other diminishing ones there with smaller numbers. So it looks like the lack of time is perhaps the biggest thing. And I guess it would be cavalier of me to say that this doesn't take time. It does really take time to do it right and to put the right effort into it.
I appreciate that perspective, and I think many of you are incredibly realistic. But I do want to say that I have learned that some very informal, on-the-street type interviews, on-the-street in quotes. Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute, sorry. I realize that the budget and the staff time is important, but I want to stress that I think you can do some very informal, on-the-street, in the elevator kind of interviewing where you can simply ask people very quickly, for example, somebody who, a neighbor of mine who regularly puts their dog waste into the bushes rather than into the garbage can. When I asked the neighbors, what's some of the reasons that you don't put your dog waste into the garbage can? Well, what I heard from 4 out of 5 of them was that they did not know. They had no idea that that's what they were supposed to do. They thought that it was just as fine to put it in the bushes. So I don't think sometimes it takes quantifiable, here's some themes, and you can do them in a very casual environment with your target market.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And we'll talk about some other ways to save money, too, on efforts as we go along. I know one of Jack's examples hits right onto that theme a little bit later. Okay.
Right. Principle 5, is that where we are?
Yep.
Principle 5 is to bring the benefits closer to the present. And I know Jack is going to talk a little bit more about this particular campaign. But I think it's a very good example of what I was talking earlier about the WIFM, where we really want to look for what's in it for the target audience to do the behavior that we want. So in this particular campaign, Save the Crabs, Then Eat Them, they are trying to get people, if you look in the small print on this next slide here, it says what they really want to do is they want to have people to fertilize only in the fall and not in the spring when it can do damage to the young baby crabs. So they're focusing on the benefit to the target audience for the behavior of fertilizing in the fall. And it's actually, if you look at this from an economic perspective, it makes a lot of sense too, because if we think that the benefit to something is way out in the future, like healthier fish 10 years from now. We do not place the same kind of value on the behavior as if it has an immediate benefit to us. So the closer we realize the benefit of the behavior, the more value we put on it. The further out the benefit, the less value that we put on it. We want to bring the benefits as close to the present and personal as possible. So these are also in the toolbox that if you go to that URL. Okay, now we'll move on to principle number 6. I know that we talk a lot about communications in social marketing campaign, but I actually talk much more about tangible objects and services that you can use to support the behavior change. If you ask somebody, what is a barrier to watering my lawn only 2 inches every week? One of the barriers of a well-intended citizen would say, well, I don't know when it's 2 inches. So one county in our state distributed these little water meters, let's call them, where you just poke it into the grass and you're able to see how much water is being used over the week. So tangible objects and services are things there to help the person support the behavior change. They're not what we would call trinkets and trash, things that are just promotional in nature. They're actually things that will help the person change the behavior. Another example is a bug book. In King County, we have a bug book because the behavior is to let the good bugs live and to get rid of the bad bugs. And what it does is it fans out. If you look at the picture on the lower left, it fans out so that when you're out in the garden, you can actually identify the good bugs and would know then to let the good bugs stay. Without that, can you imagine somebody actually taking a flyer out there or a brochure or actually even going back into the house and looking into a book? It's not going to happen. But if they've got something like that that's very convenient and accessible that they can take with them, they're much more likely to be able to do the behavior. So they're there to help us find the good bugs and kill the bad bugs. We're going to move to a questions now, and any questions that you've got on the first 6 principles.
Yes, there are a couple here, actually, that people have submitted. Here's John from New York. John asks, how do you target, now this is about target audiences, how do you target youth, students, and teenagers? They are our future on the topic of stormwater management.
Well, it seems to me that, first of all, in terms of what we say, I'm going to break it down into 3 pieces. What do you say, who says it, and where do you say it? So what we would say, I would have to say that I think the best thing to do is to get a group of teenagers in a room, ask them the question, here's what we would really like people to do, and give them a behavior that you would really like. What would be a behavior, Nikos?
Let's see, how about
Don't trash because it runs down the storm drain or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pick up the trash near the storm drain?
Right.
All right. So let's say that that's what you want them to do. What I would ask the youth is, so what gets in your way of doing that? What are some of the reasons that you don't do that today? So what I'm doing is barriers research. And then I would say, well, what would motivate you? What would have you want to do that? And I would listen to the motivators. So now that I've got my barriers and my motivators, I then might go back, develop some messages, come back to those same youth even, and say, what do you think about this? Does that seem in keeping with what you told me? And then in terms of communication channels, I would ask them, where's the best place for you to pay attention to messages like this? Is it at school, or is it someplace else? So my big answer is you go to them to find that out.
Thanks. Here's Kevin from Texas who has a question about the messages, okay? He says, what do you think about scare tactics or guilt tactics in social marketing? For example, showing car wrecks to promote the behavior of wearing seatbelts.
The theory about fear appeals is it works for some things and not others, but in general, I think the major point I'd love to make for you is to remember is if you do use fear, and it can work, it works in smoking, it's worked in seatbelts, you want to follow it up immediately with a solution. So you can give them something to be concerned about, but then right away you follow up with buckle up. There's nothing wrong with fear usually if it's valid, if it's not exaggerated, if it's real, and then you follow it up with a solution.
Okay. One quick one more. This is more general. Nancy from Massachusetts has a question. She says, after May 2008 in the second Phase 2 permit, will there still be an emphasis on public education and involvement?
Oh, yes, of course there will. The 6 minimum measures will continue. The difference in when we move to the second permit term is that we go from setting the program up to having it fully implemented and running. And I think in the education and outreach phase, that means that we really have launched into some of the things that we're talking about today. All right, I think maybe we should, in the interest of time, continue on, Nancy. So I think you're on number 7 now.
Okay, number 7 is to find a price. Remember, marketers look at pricing as a strategy as well. In the social marketing arena, that's going to look like monetary incentives and disincentives, as well as non-monetary incentives and disincentives. One of the campaigns that we've got going on right now in Washington State is an anti-litter campaign, and when the research determined that people who tossed their cigarette butts out the window had no idea that it was a $1,025 fine, the team decided to for sure make that one of the major points in the campaign because they were so shocked that it was going to be $1,025.
Now, Nancy, I just got to ask, why $1,025?
Versus $1,000?
Yeah.
So that you remember it.
Really?
And so that you actually think it's more serious. If you were to just say 1,000, they might think, oh, they sort of mean it. If you say 1,025, they know you mean it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Just like with the school buses and intersections and your car being in the intersection, it says like $72. They think you mean it.
Huh.
They think it's a real thing, not just a maybe. So using those and they
odd
remember,
numbers.
And they, well, not necessarily odd numbers, but very specific numbers, not rounded. They think you're serious, and they're more likely to remember them.
Huh. Now, I assume this wouldn't be like, say, going to a sale at Target with $999.99.
No, you want to make it 101.
Okay.
Especially if it's something you don't want. So also in that campaign is an 800 number. So when people are actually seen littering, because that was the other thing that would motivate litterers not to litter, would be if they got caught. And so we have an 800 number, just like for HOV lanes. If someone is caught littering, you as a motorist can write down the license plate, and when it becomes safe for you to call, like pull over with your cell phone or wait till you get to your destination, you call this number, 866-LITTER-1, and a live person answers the phone and takes down the information on where were you, what time of day, what did you see being littered, was it out the passenger side or the driver's side, and the license plate number of the car. In 2 days, the person seen littering will get a letter from the Washington State Patrol saying that they were seen littering by a citizen at this intersection at this time of day and what was being thrown out, and that if they had seen them, and then they get to repeat the fines for them. This is actually a sign that's in way stations for truckers, because every year in Washington State we have over 30,000 jugs of these that we've on the freeways in Washington State, and I think in other states as well.
I don't think it's a Washington State problem only.
Thank you. So this is also a way to, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing more about that one later, but that's also a way. So sometimes the price is an actual fine, and making people be more aware of the fact that there is one, especially when they don't have one or don't know that. Then there's non-monetary incentives as well. One city, Tacoma in Washington State, decided that they were getting a little impatient with people not fixing up buildings and homes that represented some kind of a danger or were dilapidated in some way. They created a website called the Filthy 15. And so all the top out of their 300-some buildings that were in this category, they put the worst ones on a website. And anybody could go there and see. And this appeared on our television stations and in the newspapers. And so there can be non-monetary incentives as well. So in the area of either recognition or actually, quite frankly, public shame. Principle 8, making access easy. In this case, our Department of Ecology created a website for contractors and home remodelers so that they had some place to post things that they were ready to take to the dump. Things like toilets or flooring or kitchen cabinets that, kind of like the Humane Society, they still had some life left in them. And they created a website so that contractors and home remodelers could post these items on the website and then go to that website and people could browse it and then get the item from the person who posted it. It's very similar to Craigslist or some of these other types. And in their first year, they went from 5,000 users after the first year to 12,000 registered users the second year, with over 20,000 successful listings. And back to the measurement, the outcome would be 20,812 items got taken off of the list. The impact was the 555 tons that were then diverted from the landfills. There's their outcome and impact measures again. And we're now on to principle number 9. I mentioned earlier that communications have these 3 components to it: the messages themselves, the messengers, and the media channels. And the principle here is to use effective ones in each case, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So relative to messages, the first principle is to make sure that your communications are clear and specific. So take a look at that one, where we're wanting people to put their towel on the rack so that the person at the hotel would know that you're willing to use it again. Now take a look at that one, and now watch the next one. And if you were betting, Nikos, if you were betting, which one do you think would get more people to leave their towel on the rack?
Oh, I think the first one, clearly.
Okay, and why?
Because it's got a picture.
Yeah. And see, we're only going to give this a few seconds of our life. We're not in charge of this program. We're not in love with this program. And yet we're only going to give it just that very little time. You know who's going to read this one? The ones who are going to read this one are the Greens.
That's right.
They're going to, and you know what? They were going to leave a note. They were going to leave a note for the house cleaners anyway, because they want it so much. So this is, in my mind, wasted. So back clear, simple, quick, because we're not going to give them much time. Next principle is to use memorable messages. Click It or Ticket is a very successful seatbelt campaign that started in North Carolina and yet is used in many states now. And it's such a memorable message, partly because it rhymes, but I think what else is beautiful about it is that it says the behavior and it says the cost for not doing the behavior all in one. And they increased their seatbelt usage from 65% to 84% when they started using that campaign, and that results in fatal and highway injuries were cut by 14%. Again, there we have our impact measure. Outcomes would be the number of seatbelts being used. Impact would be fewer injuries and deaths. Next principle is to make messages vivid, personal, and concrete. This is a tobacco prevention campaign, and when 39 spots that already existed were tested with youth said out of the 39, this was the one that rated the highest, because when the youth saw it, they thought, oh my gosh, she's smoking out of her neck? It must be addictive. So and these were teenagers, even though they'd seen the sign on the smoking and in their health classes that it's addictive, they didn't really get it until they saw her on television ads as well as in a billboard smoking out of her neck.
So this one really had that kind of shock value.
Yes, it did. It altered their belief, not just their knowledge, but their belief that it could be addictive. And this is an accompanying postcard, and that what it says there, and it was the size of a dime, and it's a postcard, and it says, this is the size of the hole they'll cut in your throat if you continue to smoke.
Wow.
So keeping it very personal, vivid, and concrete. Another principle, concrete here would be in the area of water. Here we have Bert the Salmon, who is a mascot for water quality, and he, on the back of this little sports card, it makes it very concrete that if 45,000 people, if the number in a packed Safeco field take their car to a car wash instead of washing it at a home, we will save up to 3 million gallons of water a day. And there's more examples there. But those are the kinds of things where they're actually using numbers that make it more real for people, what their one change, their one behavior can do to make a difference. I saw this. This was on an email that went across the internet, but I thought it was a great example of making it more concrete. And you can see here's a bus. And on the back it says, "Ready to quit?" And the person behind them in the cars or on the streets are seeing smoke coming out of his mouth. So I thought that was another good example of vivid and concrete and personal. The next principle is to have some fun, just like they were here in the subway station in New York City. Please, no running in the station, although we applaud your boundless energy and zest for living. Kind of like the very first slide I showed you, this makes you a little bit more willing to do something for the messenger.
Absolutely. I think some of those funny ones are the most effective. They catch people's attention.
Okay? And having even more fun. This was also on a billboard in New York City. Pets can't fix themselves. And some people don't get it exactly, so I have to explain that, you know, when you're a little kid and you had a loose tooth and your dad said to you, if that loose tooth isn't gone by the time I get home, then I'm going to put a string around it and tie it to a door handle and shut the door. So this little string is not attached to his tooth. This is attached to some other body part. And this is to encourage spaying and neutering.
Nancy, I think this falls into the category of too much information.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I probably am.
We're sensitive.
I saw an even better one the other day, and it was probably a vet, and it said, "Sexy cat, we fix that." All right, on to more fun. We really do want you to have fun. This is anti-binge drinking slogan. And I'm sorry, I'm watching the time here, so I want to make sure. We're on to Principle 11, and we're almost to number 12. Principle 11 is to choose credible and influential messengers. I read a little story about in Japan where they were encouraging people to start dressing down for work so that they didn't have to have air conditioning set so high in order to do some energy conservation. Well, they weren't getting anywhere with just messages in general. And so what they did was they asked the Prime Minister to start showing up at major events without his jacket and tie on. And in terms of outcomes, it was fun to read at the end of the article that the retailers in the area reported that shirt sales went up by 17% after he started appearing without his jacket and tie on. Sometimes it takes more than just strong messages. Sometimes a credible, influential messenger is going to be key to that. And in this case, you know, I was just thinking about in the area of like washing the cars. I think it's important that actually the messenger in this particular poster, which is on the toolbox, that the messenger is a coalition. It isn't the local water utility or it isn't the local government. I mean, it doesn't look, and it's not the commercial car washers. It's because in those cases, the messenger might not look like they've got the same agenda that you do. It's the agenda of the messenger that you want to have aligned with your target audience. So I think in many cases a coalition is the least suspect of messengers, particularly for the kinds of things that you do. In the area of teen pregnancy and youth abstinence, take a look at this poster, and I don't know if you can read at the very bottom, but of course the top part says sex with one partner can still be group sex. This is an abstinence campaign created by kids, but the very bottom it says, Mercer Island teens for delaying sex. Now imagine if that had said instead, Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, PTA, school board. Any of those would not carry anywhere near the credibility that peers did in this case. Peers are not always the answer, but in this case, it's a good example about how that would be the best messenger for a campaign like that.
And going back to your earlier point, this is an uncomfortable message.
Yes, yes. All right, so Principle 11, choosing powerful media channels. So we have our messages, and now we have our messengers, and now we go to the media channel. We want to look for ones that are uniquely designed for your target. Look for places where you can catch them just in time before they do the behavior that you don't want them to do. We'll talk a little bit about popular entertainment media, and then finally, social media. In this particular example, and I'm hoping and trusting that you're going to transfer this to your issues, but I want you to get the sense that if you really think about your target audience and where they are and what they're doing, it will help you decide what media channel to use. So in this example, for tobacco prevention, they created in porta potties at youth concerts, they created their own custom toilet paper that had messages on each tissue. So as you're sitting there in the porta potty, one message says, "May your lungs be cleaner than this porta potty." And another tissue said, "Tobacco kills one person every 10 seconds. Good thing you're sitting down." What's worse, running out of toilet paper or running out of breath? The point here is that it would feel like they were having a private conversation with somebody. So when you can reach your target audience in a unique place for them and with a message that you can tie in with the location, that can be powerful. And just like tip cards in restaurants to help conserve water. So if you really want people to conserve water, and we know that restaurants are one of the big users of water, we could have a tent card saying, "Please let us know if you'd like to serve you water today." And then another principle then is, in terms of media channels, is to be there just in time. This is a sign on a little lake in Tennessee, and it says across the top, 113 persons have drowned in this lake. Wearing life jackets, 0. Not wearing life jackets, 113. So you can imagine if you're pulling up in your car in the parking lot, getting ready to go down and get on the boat, it might very well be the thing that has you go in the trunk and get the life jacket out. Because it's right there at a moment of decision-making when you could really reach the person versus something that was in a magazine or something that was on television. How about right there, just in time, at that fork in the road, when someone was wanting to go right and you want them to go left? I'll tell you a little story about the use of popular media, which actually happens to be my favorite form of getting the word out. And that is to use, in the popular media, some people call it edutainment, E-D-U-T-A-I-N, edutainment, where you're actually using the entertainment media to get your message across. So in this case, in the Seattle area, we were facing this is about 3 years ago, we were facing potential electrical blackouts as they were in California. California was having the blackouts, and there was some concern that we might have the same thing happen to us in the Seattle area. And one of our local radio talk show hosts, I talked to him, and he said that he would be willing to do a trial on his show where he would try to get people to do something to conserve electricity. And what he did was he told people to walk around their places and to turn off their lights and to turn off their electrical monitors so that they could actually, and they could see the electricity go down as people who were listening to the show, the electrical meter for the city's utility actually started to go down as he suggested to do this. And Principle 12. It went down, by the way, by 40 megawatts. Principle 12,
Oops, sorry, I made a mistake.
do we have time for that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. In social media like YouTube is becoming more and more popular. And I think, could you go back to one right before that? I want to talk about this one as well. This last year, Mattel came out with two of them before that.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'll talk about it. 2 years ago, last fall, Mattel came out with a new toy. And what it was a dog called Tanner. And it was Barbie's dog, Tanner. And Tanner, you could feed it biscuits. And then after you fed it its biscuits, and you lifted its tail, the biscuits would come out the other end of the tail. And along with it came, because I bought these for both my granddaughters, along with it came a pooper scooper, and a magnetic pooper scooper, and a little garbage can. So talk about getting this integrated to use. What I would love to see more of us do is to work with corporations to get some of our behaviors integrated into toys and into, so that it becomes a part of their play. All right, now we're ready for Principle 12. The final principle is to be customer-centric. If we were to really boil marketers down into what is their real distinction and what do marketers really say is the most important thing, it is to think like your customer. And in your case, you are in the position to be the advocate for the customer. And by that what I mean is, for a second, think about the truckers who toss those pea jugs out the window. Think about them like a customer for a second and consider the fact that they've got a problem. The problem is they do not want to stop at the restrooms and put those pea jugs in the proper displaces. They want to keep going because for them, time is money. So if we were really thinking about what we could do to get the litter jugs off of the road, but to actually be customer-centric, we would, at weigh stations, have things for the truckers to actually drop their pea jugs into when they drove through the weigh station. No different than the post office, how we're able to drive through the post office and drop off letters. Another customer-centric thing to keep in mind of is that research has shown that customers do keep pledges, and they're much more likely to do something if they say they will. They could even sometimes be 4 times more likely if they actually sign something saying that they will. And there are some theories and philosophies that support this. And there's a theory called the self-prophecy theory, which says that we tend to be who we say we are and who we say we will be. And that's why some of this pledge phenomena works. So if you can get people to say they'll do something, it will double the chances they will. If you can actually get them to sign something, it can often quadruple the chances that they will. The other thing that helps are prompts. It's hard to see what this is, but this is in a theme park in Amsterdam. And if you see that little girl's arm, there's a little girl's arm and she's reaching up to his mouth, and she's depositing litter in his mouth. And when she walks by, it says, "Got litter?" And she walks up and puts it in there. And then when she puts it in there, it says, "Thank you." Yeah. So just walking by, and now, kids have been known to go find litter so that they can actually put it into their mouth. Okay, we're going to do a pause here for questions. Oh, no, another prompt here. One other example of a prompt for pouring down the drain. Just reminding people, and prompts, by the way, are not usually good for actually changing people's minds. They're actually there to remind people what it is they already decided that they wanted to do and already know. So prompts are more as reminders than they are behavior changers or attitude changers. And now we'll come to the questions. So take a few questions.
Yeah, we do have a few. Kobe asks, how do you get past the perception that you're putting a spin on something to get to behavior change, so that manipulation aspect of marketing?
Wow, I wish I had her here in front of me so she could give me an example. So a spin. Can she type in something?
I think those aspects that you just talked about, like making it fun and so forth, and part of the integral everyday behaviors is a great way that we sort of get past that.
I think there's a sense, too, of, as Nancy said, establishing your credibility and making sure that you're not exaggerating the message, helps to make people, I think, feel that it's not, some kind of manipulation or spin or, something that's being driven by somebody else's agenda.
Yes.
We have another question. Kathleen says, the reason we have this laundry list of action items on our agenda for outreach is that there's some uncertainty in what will have the greatest benefit on water quality. Do you all have any tips on how do we figure out the connection between the pollutants and then, the behaviors we want to target in our program?
Well, that's certainly where your scientists and engineers should be helpful. Letting you know what are the major types of pollutants and what are the sources of those pollutants and how do they relate to industry versus households.
Yeah, and I think if I would add to that too, one of the things that we encourage the Phase 2 communities to do, is to do good planning up front, whether you call it watershed planning or whether it's just planning for the stormwater program. But, by gathering together, the information that you have on water quality issues, on land uses, on potential hot spots within your community in the illicit discharge program, the types of industrial or commercial activities that are going on in different neighborhoods, assessing behaviors, all this kind of information that you can gather, be it part of your watershed plan or part of your stormwater planning process, will help you to target those audiences and behaviors that will be most effective.
Stephen from Massachusetts piped in with this. Some of our own Department of Public Works workers are browns. How do we get them to be green?
Woo! I have an example from the hospital where I used to work. We were trying to get people to take carpools, van pools, bus to work, etc. And so what we started doing was anybody who was a carpool or van pool or walked or biked or took a bus, we gave them a little pin to put on their name tag. And the pin was simply a little otter. And what would happen is that we only had about maybe 5% of employees that were doing that. But those 5% of employees stood out from the crowd. And if your supervisor, for example, had on one of these little otter pins and you didn't, you might end up wanting to find out what they did to get the otter pin. So making behaviors visible, and start with the greens and the light greens. If you make your behaviors for the people who are doing it right visible, those not doing the behavior will, by definition, stand out.
Stacy from Iowa asked a question. She liked your dog poop in the bush example, by the way. But she says she'd feel odd approaching those neighbors to change their behavior. She says, what is the best way to approach someone doing a behavior that you would like to see have changed?
Well, I think it's with a question versus a nag. So, and there are theories about that. So a question about, for example, in this case is, are you at all worried about the pollutants in Lake Washington? Well, yeah, I was hearing there's some really bad things going on. Well, did you have any idea to what extent dog waste was? And I would obviously need to be ready with some of the answers here. But I'm going to say I think that a question is the major thing I would try to use, and I would try to get to not asking it like you're a know-it-all, but like what you're trying to do is you're trying to hunt for what is it that they care about.
Okay. We had a nice question because somebody picked up on that WIFM radio terminology you used, and I think I'm combining a couple of questions here. Tanya from California asked, well, how do you target and make it in their interest for people in rural areas, especially areas with transient populations like Army bases? And then somebody else had asked a question about, well, what's in the radar screen for low-income audiences versus, high-income audiences. So there are three parts to those audiences.
Well, we would have to zero in on what the issue and the behavior here, but let's just say it is dog waste, or let's say it's fertilizer. I would stress the impact on the kids and the pets, and whatever it is that's in their own backyard that is impacted by this versus what's downtown or down the street or down the stream. What's in their own backyard that they care about that this would have an impact on, that this would improve.
And any messages for communities that have a lot of transient populations, the people maybe who live in condos and don't have the backyards, Army communities?
You know, it's funny, onto that, particularly like in the neighborhood that I live in, Washington, D.C., which could be considered very transient.
Sure.
A lot of people moving in and out, a lot of people in condos. The pet waste thing is not an issue at all in our neighborhood. And I think that's because it's been established as kind of a model behavior. And now everybody, you know, even if they're new to the neighborhood, I mean, they instantly see that everybody's doing this, and they would be very embarrassed
Right.
not to be seen, you know,
Right.
as kind of keeping up with whatever everybody else is doing.
Right, right.
So that kind of modeling of behavior seems to me to be a very powerful kind of thing.
Yeah. And because the way it works is that what you really want is a norm, and when you don't have a norm, you make it look like it is the norm. When they starting to put the pet waste bags in parks, it said to people, even unconsciously, this is the expectation. The more that you can make the expectation visible, as if it is the norm. Like I'd like to see litter bags at gas stations be the norm, just like pet waste bags. If people did that, then they'd be more likely to know that they should have a litter bag in their car.
Absolutely. All right, I think it's time for us to move on, and we've got a little summary of Nancy's points here.
Okay, I'm just going to repeat them. Social marketing is about influencing behaviors. I hope you get the distinction between education and marketing, because in marketing, we're not happy until we make a sale, and that, in our case, that's a behavior. There were 12 principles that I've covered. The first one was to take advantage of what's been done before that works and that you like and adopt it for your own. Target the markets that are most ready to act. Remember those greens, and I think the sprouts are really a very, very powerful market for you. Promote single, simple, doable behaviors. Even if you have 25 of them, promote one at a time. Understand and overcome the barriers. Those lists of reasons that they don't want to do something or that they're not doing it now are a gift to you. They are such a clue to what you should be doing. Identify your near-term benefits, things that will be, things they'll get tomorrow. Youth do not stop smoking or start smoking because they think that they'll live to be 85 instead of 82. They stay away from tobacco because they don't want their breath to stink. It's got to be something related to something today or tomorrow or at least near term. And find tangible objects or services to include. There are a lot of things that if we didn't include those, even if they wanted to, the behavior would not be easy. How can you take 10,000 steps a day if you don't have a pedometer to help you count them? Look for a price that matters, and it may be a monetary incentive or it may be a non-monetary incentive. Make access easy and convenient, just like Starbucks does. Use effective message principles that we've talked about, credible messengers, effective communication channels, and above all, be customer-centric. If you do that one, the rest of the stuff will actually come along with it. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. And I want to point out, too, to the audience that we've compiled a resource list. On your console, there's a resource button, and we have a list of some of what we thought were the key resources there. And Nancy has a couple books out. One of them is listed there. The other one, I understand that she's working on an update to and should be coming out. When would that be coming out, do you think?
Social marketing will be out in November.
November. So, okay, so there will be a new edition of that as well. And our next speaker, Jack Wilbur, also has a book that's listed there. And Jack, are you with us out there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud. Jack is unfortunately not in the room with us, but he is joining us by conference call. He's out in Utah today. And so, Jack, I think we'll launch into your part of the presentation. And if you have any technical troubles, just let me know, but we'll let you take it away.
Okay, very well. Thank you. I am very glad to be with you all today. And I wanted to, for my part of this, to talk about a few examples that have been done. Nancy had some great slides that had portions of campaigns, and I'm going to, during my section, go through, highlight 4 examples, and then try to help you to understand some of the principles of Nancy's 12 principles that these examples use very well, and perhaps some that could be done a little better. And I'm going to have to go through these pretty quickly, but all of these examples have additional write-ups in the various things that have been mentioned today. The guidebook that I wrote, the non-point source toolbox, the NPDES success stories page of their website. So you can get more information about these if you'd like. The first one I would like to discuss is the City of San Diego's Stormwater campaign. And one of the principles that they used very well was being customer-centric. But Nancy showed you what some of the results of being customer-centric might look like. But it all starts back, as she mentioned, with audience research and getting to know your audience. And the City of San Diego really wanted to do that. They wanted to understand what their audience knew, what they believed, and what their current actions were. We call that knowledge, attitudes, and practices sometimes. But beyond that, they wanted to understand why and to get to some of those barriers, as Nancy's mentioned several times during the day. So what they did first is they did a baseline telephone survey. This is a statistically significant random digit dial survey that they paid big money to have done. And and what they found were several areas of concern, and among those were awareness. And I know that it's been mentioned today that we have to start with awareness and then move our way toward behavior change. And they found that not enough people, perhaps at least half, did not know that stormwater travels to the nearest river, lake, stream, the ocean, untreated in the San Diego area. That's what happens. Now, the other thing they noticed was that there were several actions, and remember Nancy mentioned either abandoning an action or taking on another one, or a new action, or modifying an action. Well, they found in their research that people were dumping oil down the storm drains and other chemicals. They also found that people were not picking up after the pets when they were walking their dogs or whatever, or also not sweeping their fertilizers back onto the lawn or their grass clippings. So they had some things to go with. They understood a little bit about what they needed to do. Well, beyond that, they conducted focus groups. And focus groups is a qualitative form of market research, and it is not statistically significant. It's essentially like Nancy was mentioning, maybe with the teenagers, getting a discussion group together. Now, in a formal, expensive setting, a focus group is done with a trained moderator, but it doesn't have to be that way. But what you do is you ask a lot of open-ended questions. So you try to get to the why. You try to get behind what their beliefs and their practices are. And then you also can understand a little bit more about those barriers and the benefits. And that's what San Diego did. And what that helped them understand better was something that marketers call the price point. So in other words, how to overcome the barriers with those benefits, what was in it for the individual person or the public. They also, focus groups are great for testing messages and determining good mediums and channels of communication, and that's where their Think Blue slogan came from. So I think we're to a poll question. The poll question says, what market research methods have you used? The first answer is surveys only, or focus groups only, surveys and focus groups, secondary data from databases, trade associations, public agencies, etc., or haven't done this yet.
Okay, and as we did before, you just select the radio button there to the left of the answer, and then Matt, maybe you can push out the results so people can see it when we have a couple seconds there. There's lots of information, by the way, in the Getting in Step manual on doing these sorts of things, how to do a survey or a focus group. You can do them formally or informally, as Nancy mentioned earlier, so there's lots of ways of getting this kind of information, and also, of course, borrowing that data. Secondary data means basically borrowing it from somebody else that's already done it. All right, maybe, Matt, you can show us the results of that poll question. My computer is back. Actually, I think I can do it. Let's see if we are. Here we go. Okay. So we've got, let's see, about 17% said they have used surveys. Very few on focus groups. Nancy, does that surprise you?
Well, it does say focus groups. It does say focus groups only. So
yeah.
maybe, oh, I see surveys and focus groups.
Yeah, and then we have 19% say both, which makes some sense. Secondary data, about 15%, and about 45% haven't done this yet. Well, we definitely need to get on the stick and move forward with that one, don't we? Okay. Well, that always seems to come up, and so we definitely encourage you to look into all that sort of stuff. As I said, the Getting in Step manual goes into quite a bit of detail about how to do these things. And there are, lots of secondary research that's already been done. I believe it's the Gallup organization does an environmental poll, and we often use, and that information is available to you as well through the National Environmental Education Teachers Foundation or something. Send me an email. I can't remember my acronyms today, but we can get you that information as well.
And Nikos, I'd add two things to that as well, and that is that our National Outreach, Non-Point Source Outreach Committee is working on getting some kind of standardized suites of questions to be able to use. And I think sometimes having some professionally written questions are really helpful to people if they want to do more informal research. And then the other thing, I did not submit this as a resource, so I don't know if it's on the resource page or not. If it's not, I will send it to you, Nikos, and maybe we can get it to people. And that is a book by Dr. Alan Andreasen about market research that won't break the bank. And I can't remember the exact title. Nancy, maybe you remember it, but
that's the title. Yeah.
That is the title. And it's a very good description of some of these informal methods of getting some of the same information. And so anybody can do market research, and I think that really we should all look at trying to do that. So if I'm going to go ahead and move on. Then,
all right, go ahead, Jack.
One of the other things that San Diego did really well was using effective communication techniques. I talked a minute ago about the slogan, and they put it together with this logo, as you can see on this slide. It's water coming out of a pipe, and then it becomes sort of like a wave in the ocean. And it says "Think Blue," and then it's very easy to remember. It's brief, it's vivid, and it is something that actually went on everything that they did for this Think Blue campaign. Now, another thing that happened that they did not plan for was there was one of the television ads they did, and we're going to see it in just a moment, but it was, I call it the rubber ducky ad, and I think the official title they used was Foul Water. But it was a very memorable ad that was funny, both funny and serious. But these little yellow rubber ducks, I'm sure that you've seen those before. Your kids may play with them in the bathtub or whatever. But they became kind of an icon with the campaign. It was not something that they planned, but it did sort of happen. And let's see. I am trying to move on, and I'm having some trouble at this point. Let's see if I can get it. There we go. Thank you. All right, so in our next slide, with effective communication techniques, you'll notice that some of the channels that they chose, I mentioned they used television. They also used radio, internet, print, community events. This was kind of a big thing for them. And you'll see in this picture here, they used a lot of discounts. They had discounts to car washes and to get your oil changed, and lawn fertilizer companies to come and put the fertilizer on professionally. They also had prompts like frisbees and refrigerator magnets, and then of course they used volunteers. And okay, I'm still not being able to move. Let's move to the next one, please. Okay, some of the high points for this campaign were their campaign strategy. It was a very integrated approach that they used. They did a lot of market research going in, and they followed up with market research for a couple of years. One thing that was more of an impact was decrease in beach closures. They showed a 33% decrease the first year, but there is some controversy about whether that may have had something to do with a little bit of a drought cycle that they were in San Diego at the time. But they also had increased awareness, which was one of the outcomes, and an increase in certain targeted actions that were self-reported in their subsequent surveys. And some of the low points were that most of their ads really did do that shotgun approach. In some of the community-based settings, they did do the one single behavior. But this was a little bit of a of a problem for them later because they lost some funding later on, and they had to rely on just those, some of those really very local community-based approaches. So if they had been able to do more single messages when they had the big dollar advertising, it might have gone a little further and people might have remembered it a bit more. And our next slide looks like we're to the Maine outreach campaign. The goals for the state of Maine stormwater outreach campaign were to form a cooperative to use mass media to raise awareness, and this was paid for by the state. And then they wanted to standardize their strategy and their look so that they could implement behavior change messaging through their local community-based approaches within each of their municipalities. One thing that they wanted to do, and they did a very good job of, was to take advantage of what's been done before that works. They took the San Diego PSA that I mentioned a moment ago, the rubber ducky ad, and they adapted it for Maine. They also used a program logo that was augmented. The Think Blue, they took that directly from San Diego. They also added the rubber ducks, as you can see in the picture. And then the Clean Water Starts With You at the bottom, and the original Ripple logo came from their program already. So they did kind of a hybrid. And I think we're ready to see this ad.
If stormwater pollution was rubber duckies, it wouldn't matter what went down the storm drains. But it does, because stormwater pollution is not rubber duckies. It's soil, trash, oil, cigarette butts, and pet waste flowing untreated into our water. That's not good for any of us, because we all live downstream. Clean water starts with you. So think blue, Maine.
Want to talk about the ad a little?
Okay, so for those of you that weren't able to see it, you can see this picture here. There were the little rubber ducks, and they went down the storm drain. The narration was something to the effect that if stormwater pollution were rubber ducks, it would not be a big deal. But it's not rubber ducks, and then it says some of the things that it is, like oil and fertilizers and pet waste, etc. And then in the last shot, you see some kids swimming and a surfer out in the ocean, and they're all surrounded by rubber ducks as far as the eye can see. So a really effective, award-winning campaign, and all the state of Maine had to do was replace the narration and the music, just a very, very small amount of production time and a small production cost, and then they went on and ran it. So they did go ahead and pay for some places, or for some promotion of this, and then it also ran as a PSA as well. All right, well, that brings us to our next poll question, Nikos.
All right, so we have, I think this is our last poll question, and just wanted to get an idea on this beg, borrowing, and stealing that we've mentioned so many times. So have you considered using ads or messages created by other people? So again, select your options there to the left. Yes, we have borrowed material and used it. No, not yet, but actively considering it or pursuing it. No, we've developed all our own material, which is also a fine response. Certainly no shame in that. And the last one, haven't got that far yet. So select your answer there, and we'll show you the results in just a second. And I have to say that that example that Jack just talked about the connections between San Diego and Maine, really is a very effective way. And we know from talking to people that that's happening all over the country. People are borrowing and being inspired by other people's work. So we do have some results here to show you. And wow, almost 60% says, yes, we have borrowed material and used it. Great. 20% no, but actively considering it. 7% have developed their own. And 14% in that little bit of a laggard area there that haven't gotten to it, but we hope we've given you some good ideas to think about as you move forward. All right, so Jack, I'm going to turn it back over to you to continue with the discussion of the Maine campaign.
Okay, great. Thank you. So another thing that they did was they also researched their audience. Maine used surveys and focus groups, very similar approach to what they did in San Diego. They were able to establish their baseline of knowledge, attitudes, and practices, and they were able to determine their effective media channels and understand why. So they were able to kind of get to some of those barriers and benefits that Nancy has mentioned. And they used several previously created examples from other parts of the country, not just the San Diego ad, and they used many examples that came from what is now in the toolbox. So there are a lot of great examples that you can use. So I would urge people to, even if it's very informal, just to test things that have already been done and see how they play where you are. Okay, I guess, let's see, I'm there. There we go. All right. The next thing they did was choose effective communication channels. They were, along with their television spots, they did radio, print, internet, and, of course, the news media. And they then turned it over to their local MS4s, their local communities, in other words, to do some of the community-based approaches, meetings, fairs and festivals, neighborhood stewardship teams, etc. Some of the high points for their campaign, again, were their campaign strategy was very thought out and integrated, and they did a very good job of that, and one of the reasons was because of the extensive market research they did. They used existing messages to save money, and they found that their awareness has increased. They also have good message retention. And so one of the low points, though, and I think this has been mentioned before, is that sometimes it takes a while to get the awareness level to the point you need it before people will actually be able to make behavior changes. So they still have to do more rounds of advertising to reinforce this message and to build more awareness. Our next example is, Nancy mentioned a little bit, is the Chesapeake Bay Club. This is in the greater Washington, D.C. area, part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And their goal was to convince suburban and urban residents to cut back lawn fertilizer application to once a year to save the blue crab population in the bay. And we should have an ad running right now.
Spring rains in the D.C. area carry excess fertilizer to our sewers and rivers. It travels to the Chesapeake Bay where blue crabs have been rapidly disappearing. They suffocate slowly from lack of oxygen. No crab should die like this. They should perish in some hot, tasty, melted butter. So hold off on the fertilizer until fall, because ridding the planet of delicious backfin is just plain wrong.
Okay, so that ad, they showed the impacts of negative impacts, and then at the very end they had the punchline, which was no crab should perish that way. It should die in some nice warm butter. So they were trying to promote a single, simple, doable behavior. And fertilize once in the fall was the behavior they were trying to promote here. And next, can you go to the next slide, Nikos? They wanted to also understand and overcome the barriers. And the market research indicated what some of the barriers were, including that homeowners like their big green lawns. Also, Save the Bay and those traditional environmental messages weren't working very well. So this, we'll talk about in just a minute, is part of that what's in it for me. And then the chemical companies benefit from homeowners using fertilizer multiple times in a year. So the approach they figured out for the homeowners was to appeal to people's stomachs, the idea of save the crabs and eat them. Also to appeal to regional pride from Maryland crab cakes. The lawn care companies, what they did is they did a lawn care initiative where they offered a certification to bay-friendly companies. And then this made them look good, and hopefully, possibly they'd be able to charge more money. And then they're still working with the fertilizer manufacturers. They chose effective communication channels from television to radio, and in this area, which is the Washington metropolitan area, they really focused on transportation billboards. Those were up quite often in some of the major metro stops. And then, as Nancy mentioned, a very unique media for this particular campaign, they used restaurant menus and drink coasters. Also a lot of earned news coverage as well as their website. And they, for the lawn care initiative, they developed a partnership with the lawn care providers, and they distributed pamphlets and door hangers, I think about 38,000 of these, that they gave to the lawn care companies to distribute as part of their marketing campaign, quite honestly, as part of what they were able to do to promote their services. And it was a win-win for the Chesapeake Club and for the individual lawn care companies. So some of the high points for this campaign, market research going into the project, as well as their campaign strategy, and they were very well targeted to both their audience and their media mix. They did promote that single doable change that Nancy mentioned all the way throughout, and then they did come up with pretty significant awareness and increase in message retention. There was also what they found was an intent to act, because the timing of their first-year survey, we didn't have time to actually see results yet. One of the low points is, at least as of the end of last year, they did not have a second-year survey, and of course we don't know if people did the actions, and we weren't sure how effective the messages were. So at this point, Nikos, I think right there, I think we'll turn it over to you again to finish up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jack. And we have time for some questions. And before I mention that, I wanted to point out another thing. On our website, the NPDS website, we do have a number of case studies up there. If you go to the NPDS/stormwater/case studies, all one word, we have about 20 case studies, and there are several on education and outreach campaigns for stormwater that are up there, including one from Vermont, which is very instructive because it talks about a group of communities that banded together and invested about $5,000 each, and because there were 15 of them, ended up with a sizable budget and were able to come up with a very credible and effective campaign for a very low price. So that's another thing that you can think about, is cooperating with other MS4s around you. So let's turn it over to Ansu and see if there's some more questions. And by the way, we are approaching the top of the hour, but I'm going to use my executive privilege here to extend the time of this webcast just a little bit, so nobody has to worry about time running out. So we'll take a couple questions.
Yes, we will. But before we go to the questions, I want to remind everyone that the seminar will be archived so you can access it after today's live presentation. And the archived webcast will be posted within 2 weeks. So just revisit this website to view the archived presentation. And we posted the speaker's contact information in case you would like to contact them after today. We have mentioned this before, but that comprehensive resource list you can get by pressing the Resources button on your console. It's a PDF document, so you'll need Adobe Acrobat Reader to view it. Finally, a webcast evaluation survey should soon appear on your screen. Please consider completing the survey and let us know your thoughts. We appreciate your feedback as we work to improve our webcasts. If you do not see the evaluation survey on your screen, turn off your pop-up blocker. And hey, make your time count. Don't forget to download the certificate. Now, I'll just come to some questions that have been popping up here on our screens. Peter from Washington says, give us a couple tips about marketing to industries. For example, talking to brake manufacturers about copper. Social marketing to particular industry groups that, bear in on stormwater quality.
Well, I think social marketing is a very portable model. Mm-hmm. And you can take the same model from households to the industries. And the process is exactly the same. What is it that you want them to do? What barriers and concerns do they have for that? What would motivate them? Develop some strategies and test them out with them. The process is exactly the same.
Great.
And the what's in it for me is the same kind of a principle. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's a number of industries and out there that want to adopt a green image, and I've joked about this before. But you can also cooperate with different groups, like say Home Depot or something like that, to place messages to help you get them to the public as well. And the joke that I always use, though, is to look on EPA's enforcement page and see who we've sued most recently, and they'll be more than happy to work with you, I'm sure.
That'd be the low-hanging fruit.
Right, exactly.
Rosetta from Kentucky piped in when we all had collective amnesia in the room about NEDIF. She says National Environmental Education Training Foundation. So there you go. You can look that up. Thank you, Rosetta. Krista from Kentucky has another question. She says, I was customer-centric. I paid to do a telephone survey. And guess what I found? The audience was unaware of stormwater issues and did not care about stormwater issues. What now?
Well,
But
in the
what do
marketing,
they care about?
That she didn't say, Krista, Jack. Sorry.
well, in the marketing model, we move people from unaware to aware to interested and to desire and to action. So I'm assuming, and I don't read if that was a telephone survey. I'm assuming that it wasn't 100% unaware. I'm going to hope for you. So what I would say is, I'd be most curious about if it's quantifiable, is to take a look at the profile of the people that are aware and concerned, and compare that to the people that aren't. And it's what we call the users, non-users, or the doers and the don'ts. What you really want to find out is who are the people who do care, how many of them are there, and how can I grow that group? How can I go find more people like that? And so I would appeal to those. If it was like 90% unaware, then you've got some facts to get out there. The facts that are personal, concrete, vivid, ones that would actually make a difference to them if they knew about them. So there may be some facts. This is the way tobacco got started, when they started saying 1 out of 3 people will die. And if that fact's not out there relative to stormwater, you need to create those sound bites and start getting those messages out.
Yeah, I don't think that the results to that survey should necessarily be taken as a failure. I think your survey told you some very valuable information there, and it tells you what you need to start with, and that's that basic awareness and understanding of the issue. And there's no point in trying to change behaviors if you don't have a baseline there. So I think you actually got valuable information probably from this, and just need to start at a particular place to bring up that awareness.
And Nikos, 2 real quick points to that as well is sometimes, yes, you need to raise awareness first, and sometimes the first time you do it, isn't enough. The main example, they have to go back and continue awareness as they're starting to do some of their behavior change. And then in one of those other examples from Chesapeake Bay, for those people that don't care, well, they found in Chesapeake Bay they don't care about saving the crabs necessarily, or a lot of people didn't, but they're more than happy to save the crabs and eat them. So what do people care about? That's sort of wanted to elaborate on that a little bit.
We have a geographical question here. So Akar from California says, so what are some different public outreach strategies for the areas of low rainfall, like in the Mojave high desert areas where the annual rainfall is about 3 inches or so? What are some strategies we can use to excite people about stormwater runoff?
Well, I think that we did a workshop in Phoenix about a year ago, and we had to tailor a lot of our messages because a lot of the pictures and things that we typically use, have all these green trees in them and all that sort of stuff, and obviously that's not appropriate for a desert community. But again, you've got to change the focus. Your focus certainly isn't going to be the same sort of things that maybe we in the East Coast or Nancy on the Pacific Northwest are going to care about. But perhaps in those areas, sort of that flash flooding, for those few big storm events that you might get during the year are really the concern. So that may be kind of the message that you want to get, or the starting place that you want to talk about. And then, of course, in dry areas, one of the interesting things that we found when we did a little research into this is that actually the pollutant concentrations in those few storm events are much higher because there's a lot of time in between different rain events, and the pollutants build up on the landscape and then are washed off all at once in these couple different rain events during the year. So it's really kind of a different thing. So again, you might want to, tailor it to, particular things like trash and debris or dog waste or whatever that are going to sit on the landscape for a long time, and then be washed away. So I think you do have to do some tailoring, to the geographic area that you're in. Any other thoughts, Nancy, maybe on that? Or Jack? Jack, you live in a dry area.
Yeah, absolutely. And another part of that, too, is the idea that every drop counts. We really can't talk about water quality without talking about water quantity around here. And so all the things you said, Nikos, plus the idea that we need to keep every drop we have as clean as possible.
All right. Any other questions on this?
Yeah, let's take one more. Here's Rick from St. Louis who says he's interested in the process of anonymous reporting. So is the action that you're trying to promote reporting, and do those people get involved beyond that?
So
maybe for a stormwater hotline, I think?
Yeah, or with that litter hotline, they get 2,000 calls a month on that litter hotline. They are anonymous. They are not connected to the caller at all. And it is a way, and 85% of the population said, I'd love to have a hotline, a survey showed, and that's why they created the hotline.
And the anonymity helps with the program?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that we found in a couple cities when we were doing illicit discharge investigations, and this kind of came up by accident, but we were in Minnesota walking up a stream, kind of looking for flow, from the storm drain sewers in a dry time of the year, and it was kind of a classroom thing. We had about 15 people with us. And it was quite interesting that a number of people came up to us and said, well, what are you doing? And they were universally retired people. And so if you were thinking about perhaps a target audience for your stormwater hotline, who are the people that are going to be watching in the neighborhood? Well, they're oftentimes the people that are home during the day that are retired, and they really intensely want to know what's going on in their neighborhood, but they can become your sort of eyes and ears in a lot of cases to track down some of these things that, the midnight dumpers particularly, that are hard to, sort of catch and track, but, you'll find people dumping things in sort of, the quiet corners in the evenings, and if people know what to look for, they're more likely to call if they know what to do and who to call. So that's another possible thought.
And what was the repercussion of someone calling in? Did they go to that particular address and say, somebody saw you yesterday at night throwing down your used motor oil down the drain, or was there a penalty? Or?
Yeah, certainly there's a fine for illegal dumping, but they kept the caller's identification private and all that. So it was a confidential call, but it certainly has helped in a number of places I've certainly heard about. Being able to track down those kinds of things that are hard to find otherwise.
Wonderful. Just thank you for some brilliant ideas here. At this time, I think we should wrap up today's webcast. Thank you very much, Nancy, and thank you, Jack and Nikos, for presenting today. And, of course, thanks to all of you out there who joined us. Before we go, our next webcast will be July 11th. Jennifer Zielinski of the Center for Watershed Protection will build on last year's Introduction to Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination, IDDE, and will discuss the field and lab methods necessary to conduct IDDE investigations. And more information on the July 11th webcast, registration information will be posted on EPA's NPDES training courses and workshops webpage. That website is www.epa.gov/NPDES/training. That ends our webcast for today. Thank you very much.